Good night, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight in this conversation with Joseph Mcneil Jr. The Columbian Studies Group, as most of you know, is a collective created by Columbian students in New York with the aim to provide a space for interdisciplinary dialogue with a progressive and inter-American approach. To this end, the CSG encourages academic collaboration, cultural promotion, citizenship education, and the participation of activists, leaders, and other members of the diaspora in New York City. As a group, we aim to bring issues and debates from academia to the broader community and to contribute to building the bridge with activism. And in fact, most of us are also activists. We have always considered that it is important to use our platform to raise awareness about particular issues that affect marginalized communities and to amplify their voices, ultimately aiming to contribute to the decolonization of both academia and activism. Because of that, we have organized this event in which our guest, Joseph Mcneil, who is an indigenous leader and activist, will share his perspective about Thanksgiving as a holiday and what it represents to him. So Joseph Mcneil, Tatanka Wangila, is an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He is of Black and Lakota heritage. His mother is Ina Mae Brown Mcneil, great granddaughter of Chief Juan Bull, and his father is Joseph Mcneil of the Greensboro Four. He currently serves as the general manager of the Sage Development Authority, as the chairman of the OYET Community Development Finance Institute, and for the past 4 years, he has served as the president of Standing Rock Development Corporation. So thank you, Joseph, for accepting the invitation to share your perspective about this holiday tonight. To introduce the topic, I'll provide some initial and contextual remarks, and then I'll give you the floor. Okay. So we have been taught that Thanksgiving was a holiday proclaimed to celebrate how the Pilgrims and the Indians harmoniously gathered in 1621 to share a meal in celebration of a bountiful harvest. It turns out that the Pilgrim and Indians narrative is a lie, and the history of this holiday actually originated from a massacre. The holiday was established from the massacre of the Pequot villages, and later both the story and the holiday were proclaimed for political reasons. I don't want to get into many details as I don't want to take away time from our guest, but I will emphasize that the fact that the phrase merciless savage Indians written into the Declaration of Independence says everything we need to know about how the US founders viewed the indigenous people of this land. Long story short, the US ruling class fabricated a peaceful depiction between the colonizers and the tribes, but neglected to mention the amount of death, destruction, and land grabbing that occurred against the First Peoples, setting the tone for the next 200 years. Despite the efforts to sell this idea, indigenous peoples were not considered citizens until 1924, when they won citizenship rights. However, the struggle for voting rights stretched on much longer until later during the 60s. So I will now give the floor to our guest to share with us what actually happened during the first and after the so-called first Thanksgiving, and what is the actual history behind this holiday.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deanna. Well, you did a great job, so everybody keep following Deanna because she knows what she's talking about, and she gives a very good level of context to what the history is and how it had occurred. It's good to hear that coming from a place where we as Native nations struggle to build what we have inherited in a sense of broken governments, because we've been corralled into systems that we must either abide by in order to receive grants and funding as Native nations, or those funds are not provided to us. So that just jumping to now where we are, but going back, it really is telling that story of the myth. We can go back to the myth, and the myth perpetuates an attitude that exists today, an attitude of innocence and coming into a land that was a gift for Europeans when they came here, that along with that myth were the people that were here that were innocent and ignorant, ignorant of Christ, ignorant and savage, lived in temporary homes, etc. To say that we weren't civilized in a European way. And so that was kind of the beginning of the myth, to call us part of the flora, the fauna and flora of this country, saying that we were harvestable, that we were disposable. They could move us as they move the trees to clear land. They could clear us. So the first encounter with Washichus, or with Europeans, we helped them. You know, the tribes on the east helped them to live. We took pity on them, and I think that's where most of us have always been as spiritual people, as indigenous people, coast to coast, north to south, North America, Central America, South America. You find the same giving heart to help someone, and it's who we are. We're always spiritual people, north to South America as indigenous people. So to help someone who needed a hand was always our way to do. We did not know that these people already had a history of crusading against those that were brown, or those that had resources that they wanted or needed, as evident from the 13th through the 15th centuries, in the Crusades that were religiously sponsored through the church, as a means to gain profit, land, and wealth. These practices were already honed and refined before these people, these pilgrims, came to America. So they came, we welcomed them, we taught them how to live. We did not know that they had this methodology down to conquer, take, and ultimately commit this genocide over decades and centuries, to methodically move through from tribe to tribe, to gain more land, to gain more resources, to establish their methodology of commerce and trade. We won't be remiss in talking about how when the first pilgrims came over, that they were under contract already. They were indentured servants to produce. They needed to send back goods back across to England. And the reasons why was that England had already, England and the Welsh, the Irish, Scots-Irish, and a lot of Europe, they had already torn down most of their forests and their resources, overpopulated. With the Black Plague was kind of evident of what how they lived. And so when this land was embarked upon to take its resources, the system that I had talked about, that was honed over centuries, had created a lot of indentured servants, as they would call them, peasants back then. The lords that would own the lands, the same methodology and mindset here, not just in North America, but through Central America and South America. And when gold was discovered all across the Americas, that's really when you've seen the wholesale slaughter occur to our people, North and South. So when we look at the history of this events, there was already a methodology, a culture of conquest and profit that was already established, and it was not an innocent picture as the United States history has been portrayed through history books over the last century. And so when people come to terms or come to grips with the violent past, or the violent nature, we get what we have today. And it really reflects, from my opinion, into what the experiences are that we're still um, dealing with, that we're still trying to live with. When we've just seen George Floyd die, but moreover, how indigenous people, North America, Central America, are treated on this border. The kids in cages just this last year, and it was not a horrific, as horrific, horrifically portrayed as if they were white kids in cages. That wouldn't stand. But we have been relegated to this position, again, of being flora and fauna, a resource that can be moved, to take the land. So it's great to hear in these days, wherever I was used to going, that people were doing land acknowledgements of the original indigenous people of those lands. And that for me is a step in the right direction. I'm very encouraged by hearing like what you had described, Miss Deanna, the history that was exactly what I was going to say. You know, the first Thanksgiving was a massacre. The taking of Manhattan Island was another massacre by the Dutch and the Dutch trading companies. A lot of folks who came over here from Europe, when they came to a point where the people that they were learning from to live on the land were trading with for furs and trapping goods and anything like that, when they came to a point of hard negotiation, they referred to violence. And in the middle of the night, went and had a raiding party, and they went and wholesale slaughtered whole tribes of people. And so there were 3 tribes around Manhattan Island that were decimated, you know, by the same type of mentality, this profiteering. So we're going to learn until you guys don't agree with us, then we'll take it, because this is what we've done for centuries already. So for them, it was second nature, first nature, I would say, you know, first nature. And under the guise of their religion, under the guise of Christianity and the doctrine of discovery, they were by God-given right, you know, their God-given right, the ability to do this. So we are coming to terms with this violent culture that was brought here on us 400 years ago, 500 years ago, 400 to 500 years ago. And there is going to be, I feel, a forced identification, recognition that we have to live with the earth. We have to live within the law of nature, nature's law, to maintain a balance so that we can live and our kids can live, because we can no longer usurp and take, as this culture has. In the matter of 300 years, we have brought the world to climate extinction. There is a mass extinction that is occurring, multiple species. We are looking at a possibility of having extinction of the human race. And indigenous people, we lived here for 60,000 years, maybe more. And we did just fine. You know, we had trade routes going from north to central to south. Our religions, our spirituality maintained a balance, and we did not destroy this world. So we're going to be looking at, as a world community, how do we come into balance with the earth? And that is something where the rest of the world is going to look at Native America and look for guidance. And that's where we, as indigenous people, need to go back to our roots on who we are, you know. And even our names, you know, Standing Rock Sioux. I'm not Sioux, I'm Lakota, you know. It's like the Navajo are not Navajo, they're Dene. And Mexicans are not Mexicans, Mexica, and the other indigenous names that are there. The colonization of Mexico was horrifying to the indigenous people, and the caste system that was established, that the indigenous people the tribes are the lowest of the low in that society that was brought by the Spaniards. So it's been an interesting journey, and I think we're all on this journey. And I'm very happy to be talking not just to North American indigenous people, but all of us that are Central American, South American, because we need to come together. We need to share each other's stories. We need to get the trade routes of our stories and our connections back so that we can eliminate this false border that has been put there between us. So I know I went around a little bit, but in coming back is knowing history, doing the research, and coming to the hard truths about the systems that people lived with before they came here and what they brought here, that level of violence and the level of genocide that has occurred to all of us, but we're still here. And that's the very important part that I'm happy that I can visit with everyone that's on this call. And hopefully in the future is that we're still here. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams, that they would think that we would still be able to live, drive, think, pursue careers, pursue engagement without living in a box. Because the reservations like Standing Rock has a war camp, was a war camp, and we were the original peoples that were placed into concentration camps were American tribes and tribes up and down. So just a quick touch here is that when the Nazis looked at how they wanted to treat the Jews, they looked at how the Americans treated the natives, and they followed the example. Same thing in apartheid. How did they take the original people and remove them from their resources? Was the same example that was followed in South Africa. So I go back to this original myth of telling the story about pilgrims and natives being friends and hand in hand, because it goes back to that twisted innocence that belies the genocide, the violent genocide of a people. And there has to be a coming to terms of that. But hopefully it doesn't come with our blood again.
Thank you so much for your remarks and your insights, Joseph. Going back to Thanksgiving and all of this holiday, I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about the National Day of Mourning and how does your nation and tribe commemorate this holiday or this day?
Mhm. Well, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. We don't say that it's, oh, we're celebrating the pilgrims and etc. Like that. We celebrate each other's as being survivors, as surviving through this this American onslaught, basically. So going back to what I mentioned about reservations being war camps, and I have a card, that has my 302U1 number on it. I'm a card carrying Indian, some people say. And there are a lot of tribes who aren't card carrying, and that is absolutely fine because it doesn't define you as a native. Your spirituality defines you as a native. Where you come from, where your history is, where your language comes from, how you pray, your connection to the earth defines you as indigenous to this land. And those people who don't have that card were the people who were almost completely exterminated. We look at, there's a phrase that if you're Native American, then you are of the 2% of the people that survived the American Holocaust. 2%. So out of 55 million, 2%. So going back to the history, the Day of Mourning, it really has to reflect this genocide. And as much as the Jewish Holocaust has been honored and memorialized, Our Native American museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C. is a reflection of modern history, but it really does not tell in it doesn't do justice of the greatest Holocaust that has occurred in modern human times. As we can go back, when has another continent's people been almost utterly annihilated and its culture been removed for its resources? This is one of the greatest hypocrisies that we live with on a daily basis. So it is a national day of mourning, and to pray is to always commune or to talk, to visit with your relatives who brought you to today, to visit with them, because they're waiting to hear you. And when you need help, they're waiting to help you. And when I tell my nieces and my nephews and my children this, I said, when things get tough, think back 400 years until you can't even think about who your relatives are, and reach back to them for strength. And all of us as indigenous people do this, is reach back for that strength, because we're working today for our children 500 years from now, 7 generations from now. We're working for those children, our relatives. So, going back to this day of mourning, for us, we lived it, we made it. We made it. We're here. Our parents, grandparents, and all them made sure that we, have a place here, survived. And a lot of that had to do with acculturating, boarding schools. My mother went to a boarding school and didn't teach me the language because she was afraid to. And now I'm trying to learn the language to keep our culture alive. So she feels bad about that. And a lot of relatives, parents feel the same way, that are my age, and those folks are in their 70s, about the language. But my kids' generations and my generation, the younger part of my generation, really made an effort to bring the language back. So coming from a place of survival, of acculturating to this American way of life for survival, and our religions being outright outlawed. It wasn't until 1976 that our religions were allowed to be practiced again. So when someone says, get over it, that was a long time ago. No, bro. that was in my lifetime. I think I was 7 years old when our religions were allowed to come back. And a lot of us are very fortunate that happened for us, that we get an opportunity to pray in that way, to pray from our toes as they touch into the earth and reach down our spirit into the earth. And then with our other hand to reach up to the stars, to the star nation, to our yate that live in the stars. We're fortunate to know that, because we could have been completely wiped away. So going back to Thanksgiving being a day of mourning, it is. But there's so much to be thankful for when we can talk about our religion, when we can talk with people who have a connection to guide us, and we can reach back and pray to those that continue to guide us. I think as Lakota, not I think as Lakota, but as Lakota, we, as Lakota men, we have a part in our lives where we go seek our vision, what we are to do with our lives, because we're communal people, meaning that everybody had a part to play in the community, and we all moved together to support one another as families. But as individuals, we all have our own path. And so in that path is what we're to do with our lives. And so we're very fortunate to still have that belief, because it reaches to your soul and to who you are. We were skinning a buffalo the other day, and because my wife and her friends, Florice, actually she's my relative too, Florice, and my other cousins, Janet and Brenda, we're all there, and we had our hands, taking the skin off, and then we were butchering and, taking things off. and we were using these metal knives, that we have today. And my grandpa always carried one, and I carry one. It's just for use. So I had to think back to when our people were, 500 years ago, and they were using knives of stone or of bone to do this hard work that was dulling my knife. And we were working like crazy to get this thing done. But there's that connection. There was really a connection of my hand in the fur, my hand in the skin, of pulling it back and doing the skinning and doing it in a way that was respectful, because we all have that respect for the buffalo, because it's going to give our people life. And we prayed that way before we began. We thank them for providing life for our people, particularly in these hard times of COVID. So there's the connections that we have as indigenous people. And, just encourage everybody to seek that out, or to talk with someone, or visit someone, or call me, text me. Because we all have the connection back how to pray. So mourning, yes. Survival, yes. We survived. And we won't celebrate this false history. And more of it's coming. And this 2020 year, this time of great tumult, is really wiping away the garbage that has existed upon us for 200, 300, 400 years. The tyranny of slavery, the tyranny of profit over people, and us getting back to indigenous ways of food sovereignty, of claiming our own foods, our own religions, and our own communications, so that we can give that to our kids, because that's the future. Not, I'm going to accumulate wealth for myself so I can be buried in a stone box, but what are my kids going to have? So I'm really long-winded. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. No, I love how the nuances in all of your insights and response, and everything that you were explaining gave us, I guess, gave us a good context of how you commemorate this holiday. And now going forward to the current time, I wanted to ask you, in the context of, I know you talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but in the context of the current situation and the realities of indigenous peoples in the US, how does this false and mainstream narrative of the harmony between the pilgrims and the native present challenges for indigenous peoples right now? You were mentioning that people sometimes tell you, just get over it, but it's not that long ago that this struggle was still happening, and I'm sure it's still happening right now. So how does it reflect and present challenges on the exercise of your rights, not only individual rights as an indigenous person, but also collective rights that you were mentioning before?
That's a really good question. It goes back to me talking about like my relatives in the past, and I don't mean this as a critique of them that they were right or they were wrong, because we all have to survive. And like my aunts and my uncles, my grandparents, they had to survive. They had to survive so that their kids could live, so that their language could live, so that they could still speak it. And it was very important for that to happen. And I think I mentioned a little bit before is that, in that process of surviving, there's a Stockholm Syndrome type behavior where you become acculturated, where you start believing in this American culture. We always fought for our country, particularly where I'm from. We always fought for our country and continue to do so, even in World War I and World War II, when we weren't even citizens of this country. We fought for our country. And that's really where we look back, and as relatives, we could see some of those things that could have been mistakes, but for them, it was survival. And ensuring that we are alive today to delineate the wrongs of the past so that we can live a more identified future that is wholly back to who we are as indigenous people. I remember an uncle of mine talking about things, and I used to look at him like, geez, you don't like your people. And, he's talking about his own family. We're talking about our own people sometimes. And even in my own practices at times, being in business, there is a means to make a profit. But for me, it's to make a profit so that the business still provides opportunity for people, not for me to gain personally. I don't own property. I try to, be as modest as I recognize I can be. So, getting back to being part of this culture, this American culture, and getting a grasp on how we were assimilated, and because one of the number one goals, they couldn't kill us all because they couldn't beat us, first of all. In a lot of places they just couldn't outright do it. Then to kill the Indian inside the man. So that's been largely accomplished, where we're almost, which is really difficult about this time of COVID, is that we've almost lost our language. We have a lot of elders who passed away, particularly at Standing Rock. I think we had 10 elders pass within the last 2 months that knew the language fluently, could speak it like I'm speaking to you right now, talk it quick. And now we have folks that, we're really treasuring because they're the last of our language speakers. So that accepting it and surviving and thriving in an American culture and retaining who you are as an indigenous person, as a native person, that spirituality they have to exist hand in hand. So when we look at the Pilgrim Story, we know that exists in modern American commercial media and in the holiday, but we don't have to preach it. We don't have to believe it anymore. We don't have to see it. A lot of my relatives are Christian. I'm not a Christian. I won't believe in the God or the Christ that allowed us to be wiped out. I just flat out won't do it. But my cousins are, and when they pray and they do things, I can't go. I can't be around you, because they're my relatives. I love them, and we all have to remember that we're all on different parts of the journey, different parts of exposure to knowledge, and how do we live with that knowledge and make it a part of our lives that's beneficial for people, that doesn't put our own relatives in particular down. So that part of this education is to always lift people up and to enlighten as much as we think that we may be, but maybe our delivery is terrible. So are we really enlightened? So we have to always look and try to seek and find ways that we can be common, that we can relate, that we can communicate in ways that uplift as we move through this journey in education. So it really goes back to education. And I'm fortunate, to be able to have an example of, some of my relatives that believe in Jesus and the Holy Ghost, and they prayed all that. And inside, I'm like, ugh. But it's what they believe to get through the day. It's what they believe to get through COVID. And when it comes down to it, we're all there at each other when the funerals occur. We're all there for each other when the birthdays occur, and when we need help, and when there's feeds, and when there's powwows and gatherings and ceremony. We're there. I practice a Lakota religion that those relatives didn't participate in. They didn't come because they believe in the church way. Doesn't make them any less my relatives. They're my blood. So that example, I said that just so that we can talk about who we are as indigenous people to our American fellow citizens. There has to be a way for us to communicate. And we can't just outright hate, because then there's no communication. Am I upset because I see our resources being utilized? I see a system of society that has profited a way of white supremacy uh, and marginalizing all communities of color, all communities of color. We could say that and be honest about it. All communities of color. African people on my father's side went through civil rights and came up in civil rights through the American culture, up in through the American culture, and fought for those civil rights and made that happen. We are coming at it from another angle because it's our experience. It's where we were relegated to. We were put in these war camps, and then with border towns, we had to survive. But even in these reservations, we were being picked off still. Year by year, people would disappear. So, but still, we have to come to terms with who we are as neighbors, and with who we are living in the same spaces. Hopefully, and I think the more that you have, like I had a few white folks that grew up in our neighborhood and where I grew up on Long Island, and I think we had like 3 white families in a whole Black community, in Hempstead, Long Island. And now it's I think it's all almost El Salvador, and there's another Central American country, but it's almost all that now. And I'm like, cool, because that means that my people have slowly taken over all of my town that I grew up in, and it's almost half Black and half indigenous. Let's just say that. Half indigenous, because we have to recognize that not Spanish, not Central American, we're all indigenous, but still have that respect for where we're coming from. So in that way, I hope that I've addressed the modern story of the Pilgrims and how we come to terms with it. Don't put me back on that. Man really rambled. He's too old.
Thank you for the response. I actually have a question from the audience that is watching us through Facebook Live. The question is, what things can be done to support Indigenous people and their legacy? Indigenous history is Northern American history, and culture is yet it is neglected.
I think it is finding out about where you are. Let's say you're in Baltimore. There are Indigenous people who lived in Baltimore, and where are their names? In almost every town in this country, you've had or have teams that have been, called some sort of Indians, the Braves or the Redskins. The horrible history of the Redskins. Not just that it was Redskins, but the horrible history of what a Redskin was. That was the wholesale campaign that you couldn't carry around so many heads anymore. So they just said, well, just bring the skin of it, because there was a bounty on any native person that you killed. So, there's just history that goes back into everything that exists now in Native history. So do your research or ask, seek out local tribes. Like in New York City, there's the American Indian Community House, and they've been there, I think, for 60 plus years, maybe 70 years. And start talking with people, find out what's happening there. But the history is where we really need to make real change. And I believe that in going to the schools, your local schools that you pay your tax dollars so that your kids can attend, make sure that the real history is being taught there, not American history, which is the indoctrination of us to believe this myth so that we can just become steady feeders into the system and profit. I'm not a communist, but you just see it for what it is after a while. So it's, don't believe the hype, basically, and learn the history and have your schools teach the real history and do their research and hold them to account for it. Just don't say that, okay, they said they're going to do it. No, find out what measures of change are going to be and be adamant about it, because we don't live that life. We don't live white lives. We don't have that level of inclusion into this society. So we create all of our own. We all have our own communities, and we all come up through there, and we all achieve, a level that we want to get to. I mean, for a while there was chasing this whole idea, oh, I'm gonna have a big house, I'm gonna have a car, I'm gonna have all this and all that. And then as I get older, I think about it, I'm like, was that really important as making a discussion like this happen or bringing somebody else up? So, coming into those realities of passing on knowledge, I think are more important for us as Indigenous people, or those that support Indigenous people, so that we live in a world of balance. I heard a real hard fact not too many months ago, is that there's more domesticated animals on the planet than there is actual wildlife. That says a lot. That is a big problem. And how do we address that? Because this is the world we're giving our kids. And if we're not actively recognizing these issues, then we are guilty of perpetrating these issues. So it's like, once you know, you can't unknow. And seek out what it is your roots are, or the people, if you're not Indigenous, the people that are around you, what their roots are, and come to terms with the earth around you. You just don't look up and say, oh, it's a beautiful sun, because that beautiful sun has given life to us, and all the relatives that we have around us on a daily basis, the grass, the trees, the beings that live inside the grass and the trees, the spirit of the wind, the spirits of the earth, the spirits of the animal nations that are around us. They all exist in a spiritual way, and that's what needs to be promoted and discussed and found out, because we live with the earth. We don't live on it. We go back to the stars. We came from the stars, we go back to the stars, to our relatives there. But while we're here, we need to take care of this place so that our relatives can continue to make that journey.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Now, I just wanted to open it for you to give some closing remarks if you wanted to, as we're approaching the end of the panel. So,
didn't I say enough? I'm really tired of hearing myself talk. I hope everybody's enjoying or getting something out of the conversation, because I don't know everything. I'm still learning. I was fortunate enough to be allowed into to be born Lakota and Black. Growing up in New York in an all Black community really taught me to work twice as hard, and that this country isn't a given to me, and to be tough, about things. And then I moved home when I was 22 to go to school, because New York was a little too fun and I had to get away from it. It was going to kill me. So I was fortunate to come home and get in touch with my spiritual roots with my family. So, we're all fortunate to be born where we're born, and we're all fortunate to be born Indigenous, because we have that connection. There's so many people that are in this world that are lost and spinning because they believe the American hype. They believe this Western culture, and this Western culture has a lot to atone for. The whole idea about repatriations for people who have been wronged, I don't think that's a wrong idea. I think there has to be I don't want to say a reckoning, but there has to be some coming to terms with people who have been purposely marginalized, who have been purposely disenfranchised, dislocated, removed, scalped away, basically, from the lands that we live in, from North America to South America. You know, this is Turtle Island for us. And forgive one another as we educate one another, so that we can learn. We're all going at our different speeds, but those of us that know, it's our responsibility to do this in a way that that is kind, but we're relatives, and you know, we have to look at each other that way, like we're relatives. Even though we don't all speak the same language, we're still relatives, and we've been through it. Our parents have been through it, been through the genocide. And going back to that, the previous question is what can people do? Is really talk about what occurred here, to indigenous people, as the genocide that it was. Straight up, it was a genocide, the greatest in the history of mankind. In the land of the free and home of the slave. Oops, the land of the thief and the home of the slave. Oh, I missed it again. Land of the free and the home of the brave. That's right. I don't believe it. But we're relatives. That's my deal. So
you mentioned something that was like really resonated with me, because when you were mentioning about reparations and doing the right thing to people that had been wronged, I remember this past year I was like studying transitional justice, and the more I know and I learned about the actual history of the US, I realized that there needs to be a process for like coming to terms with the past, but it can be one-sided. It has to be two-sided, in which the perpetrator and the side that the party that did the wrong thing to the other has to really provide actual measures to show good faith, that things are going to be different, because land acknowledgement is great. It's a step forward, but it's just symbolic, and people need more concrete measures that show that their needs and their harm that they suffer, it's acknowledged and recognized in an actual way.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, 100% with that. Oh God, this election was a real. I was happy that it happened this way, because it shows people for who they are. You know, when you see somebody with red hat, you know what camp they're in. You know what their belief system is, and they're not going to want to work with you. But that can't continue over generations to sustain itself. The Second Amendment was put into place so that homeowners or landowners could continue to expand their lands and fight against the Indians who were fighting for their own survival. So they made it lawful to have a militia and go kill. It wasn't to defend themselves against the English. It was to continue to take more land. So I said initially, there's a real reckoning with this violent history that this country has. And those people that continue to live that way and continue to believe that are going to have to really come to some type of terms. And I hope that we can insulate ourselves, with knowledge and community, and work with those that are willing to work with us, to create better places. And they can have their communities if they want to. Just stay over there. Don't kill us anymore, because I'm gonna kill you back. But there's so much to talk about, and I wish that, Miss Deanna, we could continue the conversation, because I'd love to listen to what you have to say, because your love, what the education that you've gone through, are real gifts to people like me that haven't been through that. Me as life experience, and my own searching and researching, what I ask people to do. So I would love to learn more from you.
Well, I hope we can continue the conversation later. We can do a follow-up event on this issue because I know that there is a lot of interest also in this kind of topics. So definitely we can organize another event. And this has been actually a very learning and enriching experience to me to learn more about the indigenous history. Doing research for this event, I learned so much. And I think we should all go through that process, you know? It's really, it feels really good when you know, when you stray the facts. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Not only learning about this, but also having this conversation with you has been really enriching for me, and I hope for the audience as well.
I hope so. Now we got to talk about where we're going next, and making those bridges and making those connections, moving on into the days to come. So we're working on that at Standing Rock, and we're crowdsource funding a wind farm, and that really, I hope, is a model for other communities, not just Native communities, but other communities of color, marginalized communities that could put their resources together and start generating our own electricity, because we can do it. We're working on that now. And part of that is so that we control our own destinies as we did previously and live in balance. So more to talk about.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We hope to see you tomorrow in our next panel about gender-based violence in Colombia. So we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you again.
Adios.